Let's try another example. This time we have 4x cubed minus 49x. We're factoring. We need to make sure that we are checking for a GCF. When we look at our smallest coefficient, our smallest number of 4, 49 divided by 4 gets us a decimal, which means that 49 is not divisible by 4. Next number that divides 4 is 2. But when we take 49 divided by 2, we again get a decimal. That's not helping us. Okay. The only other number that goes into 4 is 1, which means that for our numerical part of our GCF, or our number part, it's just going to be a 1. We're hoping that there's a variable part to our GCF, otherwise this one looks like it can be kind of icky. But when we look at this one, we notice that we have an x cubed next to the 4, and an x to the first next to the 49, which means that we can take out an x or a 1x because they both have 1, which means we're going to divide both of our terms by x to factor it out. Since I'm factoring out my GCF of x, I'm going to put x out front of the parentheses and open up those parentheses. When I have 4x cubed and I take out an x, I'm going to wind up with 4x squared because 3 minus 1 gets me 2 in the exponent. Bring down my minus in between them, and 49x over x, those x's are going to cancel, which means I have 49. But notice that we have a square hanging out in this parenthesis. We have a 4x squared, which means that we can't stop. We have to check to see if it'll factor. If it doesn't factor, fine. But if it does and we don't check it, we're going to get marked wrong. So we're going to ignore the x that we took out, the GCF. We'll come back to pick him up. Don't leave your sibling at the mall. But we're going to concentrate on you and your friends inside the parentheses. In this case, a is going to be 4. It's our leading coefficient. And we know that c is negative 49 because that is our constant term, the number without any variables, which means that we're missing b. We don't have an x to the first. When we're missing b, remember, that's a 0. So when we're doing the bottoms up method and we're looking for the product of a times c, we're looking at 4 times negative 49, which gets us to negative 196. And we're looking for a sum of b, which is 0. Okay. This next hint only works when you're trying to find sumo. And you may be asking yourself, what the heck does she mean sumo? We're trying to find a sum of 0, which if you don't put the equal sign, looks like sumo. Whenever you're trying to find sumo, that means that you have a perfect square. Now we have a perfect square formula, but we don't need it because we're doing the bottoms up method. Again, this will only work when you are trying to find sumo. You're going to take the product in your calculator and find the square root. Now, the trick with this is that you are not going to take the sign. So our product is negative 196. In our calculator, I want you to take the square root of 196. If we take the square root of 196, we get 14, which means 14 times 14 gets us to positive 196. Since we want a negative 196, we need one of these 14s to be negative. And when we add them together, we get 0. So we found our sumo. The two numbers, the two magic numbers, are negative 14 and 14. Now that we have found the magic numbers, go ahead and write our factors. We had variable of x, so we're going to have x minus 14 and x plus 14 because the second one was positive. We need to divide by a, and in this case, a was 4. Remember, a was 4, so we're dividing both of our constant terms by 4. And we need to simplify our answers. Use your calculator, 14 over 4, and then convert back to a fraction. You have to have it as a fraction, not as a decimal. You should get negative 7 over 2, and then x plus or positive 7 over 2. We're not done because remember, bottoms up says that if you still have a bottom after simplifying, if you still have a denominator, that needs to come up in the parenthesis. Remember, the parentheses are the house. You're not kicking somebody out of the house just because they want to move up from the basement. So the 2 stays inside the parentheses, but it'll be 2x minus 7 times 2x plus 7. And this time you are not going to get yelled at by your mom. You are going to remember your sibling, that GCF of x, which means that our final answer is x times 2x minus 7 times 2x plus 7. Let's try another example. So this time we have 40y squared plus 10y minus 5. And since we are factoring, the first thing we're going to do is see if we have a GCF. Our smallest number is 5. It is also our constant term. In this case, 5 divides 40 and 5 divides 10. We already know that 5 divides itself. So our GCF is going to include a 5. It's not going to include a y because our 40 has a y, our 10 has a y, but the 5 does not. So no y in the GCF. We're going to divide each of our original terms by 5, our GCF. Since we're dividing by 5, we're factoring it out. We're going to put the 5 outside the parentheses, and then let's find out what goes inside. 40 divided by 5 gets me 8. My y squared comes with me. Bring down the plus. 10 divided by 5 gets us 2 with the y. Bring down the minus. 5 divided by 5 gets us 1. Bring down your signs first, and then you know something has to go after it. We're not going to have 3 terms drop down to 2 terms. Okay, you have to have the minus 1. Notice that the y squared is hanging out inside the parentheses, which means we need to see if we can factor this. We have a is 8, b is 2, and c is -1. Watch your signs. We're looking for a product. which remember means multiplication, of A times C, which means that we're looking for a product of 8 times -1, which gets us -8. We're looking for a sum of B, which is 2. Remember, you can start with any of the factors that you want. So you could use -1 and 8, but that gets you 7, which is not the sum we want. The numbers that we are going to want are a +4 and a -2, because 4 times -2 gets us -8, and 4 plus -2 gets us the +2 for which we were looking. So we found our magic numbers. When we write our factors, be very careful. We did not have x as our original variable. We had y. And if you include x instead of y, the answer will be marked wrong. Since the 4 is positive, we're going to have +4. And then we have another parenthesis to house the -2, which becomes -2. Remember, when you are doing the bottoms up method, you have to have a bottom. You have to divide by A. So we're going to divide both of our numbers, those constant terms in our factors, by A, which is 8. And we're going to simplify our fractions. Make sure that you put 4/8 in your calculator and convert back to a fraction. You cannot flip-flop. It cannot be 8/4. That gets you a different answer. You should wind up with 1/2. And then when you simplify 2/8, you should get 1/4. Almost done. We have bottoms left in, we have denominators left in our parentheses, and we don't like that. They need to move out of the basement and be on the same level as everybody else, which means that the 2 comes up, and we have 2y plus 1 in the first parenthesis. And the second parenthesis is going to be 4y minus 1. We're not going to circle that as our answer because we're missing one thing. You got it. We are missing that GCF we originally took out. You need to have that GCF in your final answer. Otherwise, it will be marked incorrect.